For every guitarist, playing a big emotional solo people can remember and obviously feel attached to is really our biggest goal, no matter what the hell anyone else tries to tell us. But how do we accomplish an emotional solo? Because to many eyes it seems like it could just be luck, good timing, a bunch of other random piss factors that may or may not mean anything. This video is really going to break down the most important things, and if you get these right, your solos will almost always hit someone in some emotional spot, or at the very least, just be memorable tone-wise, and people will remember them, which is half the battle. So, since emotion doesn't mean as much if it can't be remembered, we're going to start with the fundamentals of creating a memorable solo, which will bring us to rule number 1, which is make it and just keep it simple. If it's too complicated, too shreddy, it'll sound awesome most of the time, but who cares? Because who the fuck is going to be able to remember that? Your brain just can't do that with pitches, and that's totally okay, because sometimes that really is appropriate and the most emotional way to go. General rule of thumb, make it simple, keep it simple, and you just do this by making sure it's hummable. You can hum it, it's simple enough, and if you can clap it, that's just how you know the rhythm is simple enough for people's brain to latch on and remember to as well. And if you have some other way to measure that, do it. It's not rocket science. Now that that's out of the way, how do we make it simple but memorable at the same time? Because if we just play the same boring phrase like 4 times, it's not going to sound good. But I said 4 times for a reason, so you can repeat something 3 times before it gets too old most of the time, which is why we stick to no more than an AAAB phrase. However, we don't want our solo to stay in the same spot for too long, because that is boring for a guitarist. It's just not the best move, so reserve this for vocal melodies where it is extremely powerful. And instead, we're actually going to use something called an ABAB or an ABAC method that is going to tie into something called call versus response. So, call and response is a concept that's going to attach to these melodic blocks, and when they attach, it is the easiest way to create emotional power at a memorable level and is super sustainable throughout your solo, so you can repeat this block with different phrases. But before I give you an example, I'm going to break down what actually is call and response and what it means for these A, B, and AC phrases. The first way to differentiate them is something many of you probably assumed, and that is call is actually just another way to create a question. And when we create a question with our phrasing, obviously a very satisfying thing your brain will remember, get whatever dopamine release when it predicts there's an answer, is a powerful response. So when you think of this more as question and answer versus the more musical term, we can infer that we can use speech patterns to infer how these pitch patterns should actually end. Create something that resembles a call, we need to end at a different pitch that is higher than the one we started with, like this. And obviously, since the call ends high, it probably means the response ends low. And if you made that correction, you're probably a natural guitar soloing, because that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to create your first phrase to end sort of at a higher note like this. And as long as the response note ends lower than the initial note of the response, it is a powerful, effective response. Here's an example of a call and response together. And that is how you do it, and you can repeat this over and over. But there's a way to make it more memorable than just doing A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, and besides just doing A, B different every single time, which is where we get into an ABAC melodic structure that's going to be more effective for soloing than ABAB. The reason we call this an A phrase instead of like phrase 1, 2, 3, or whatever is because we're going to repeat it here and here. And instead of repeating that B phrase, we're going to create a different response to the same call. And the reason this works really, really well with soloing and why I love to use it all the time is we create an expectation in the brain right here, and it kind of breaks it, but it goes back to it. And when it goes back, it expects to break back to here, but it breaks to the C phrase. So when we play the C phrase, it is going to be the emotional high point of that kind of chapter of the solo in form of melodic blocks. So you can really drive home the emotion on the C phrase, obviously meaning that's where your phrasing is going to be the most important, and we'll get there later. So now that you understand how they're structured, we're going to get into that phrasing part I was telling you about. You really have to phrase it like you are singing through your guitar. If you feel like you're angry, you gotta go fast pitched, you gotta go hard picking. And really, there's no good example I can give, because this is really going to come just from your brain. But since you're watching this video with good experience, you obviously know your own style and your own feel, and you know that maybe your vibrato sounds more sad, and if that's what you're going for, good. But if you're going for something happy, upbeat, don't do it. Do some high bends that really sound good for you, whatever. Find phrasing that works with your fingers to give out certain emotions, and just use those where you see fit. As long as you keep in the number one rule of keeping it simple, keeping it hummable, keeping it clappable, however you want to say it, keep doing that. And now the third one could be the most important one, depends on who you ask, is you have to understand the chords behind. Because the chords are really what gives the emotion, while your solo is just what amplifies it. And the problem with chords is there's so many factors that go into it, because tempo obviously kind of gets the mellowness anger gradient, and kind of the major minor transitions is what gives happy versus sad, crushing versus rising. And in a phrase I kind of like to say is just a 5 chord is not always a fucking 5 chord. It's not always happy, wanting to go forward, just because of what's played before and after it. Here's kind of an example I can give. Even if we play a minor chord before it, if the minor chord is lower in pitch, it kind of has a different feel than if the minor chord was higher in pitch. So you really have to know how that chord progression sounds, and use that chord progression to understand what's going on, and then obviously factor in the drums and the bass, which are usually already going to match the emotion of that harmony. And then it's up to you as a guitarist to amplify that. Because if you try to do something different, it's going to sound like shit. And people do it all the time if you go to open mics or whatever. And it just kind of sucks. And it's not their fault, because some people just don't really know it or know how to listen for it. So when you learn how to listen for what the chords are doing and how those feel, you're in a good spot. Making sure you have that simplicity rundown, a good understanding of the chords, and just understanding what you're doing and the reason behind why you're doing it when you're phrasing, you're gonna create emotional solos people remember, and you pair it with that powerful ABAC block or ABAB, you can use whichever. You're going to have these catchy, memorable, but more importantly, powerful solos that people are going to feel while you play them, instead of just thinking, it sounds cool. They'll feel it, they'll invest in it, and they're just going to love you for it. And if you found these tips helpful, leave a comment below along with any other feedback you think you need to give me to make this channel better for everyone else, including you.